Well, this morning we are looking at Luke chapter 12. We're continuing in the Gospel of Luke. And we're looking at these two stories, or two sections, I should say, put back to back. Jesus has an interaction, he tells a story, and then he gives a teaching following that story. And if we study the Bible in teeny tiny chunks, we often miss the way that these sections are related to each other. So I want us to see how this is not just a story here and then a story there and then a parable here and then a parable there, but these are sewn together, they flow together in a way that the author Luke, the editor Luke, is putting them together in a certain way to show us what Jesus was all about. So let's look together at Luke chapter 12, verses 13 to 34. Someone in the crowd said to him, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the family inheritance with me." But he said to them, "Friend, who set me to be a judge or arbiter over you?" And he said to them, "Take care. Be on your guard against all kinds of greed, for one's life does not consist in the abundance of possessions." And he told them a parable. The land of a rich man produced abundantly. And he thought to himself, "What should I do? For I have no place to store my crops." And then he said, "I will do this. I will pull down my barns and build larger ones, and there I will store all my grain and my goods. And I will say to my soul, 'Soul, you have ample goods laid up for many years. Relax, eat, drink, and be merry.' But God said to him, 'You fool, this very night your life will be demanded of you, and the things you have prepared, whose will they be?' So it is with those who store up treasures for themselves, but are not rich toward God." He said to his disciples, "Therefore I tell you, do not worry about your life and what you will eat, or about your body and what you will wear. For life is more than food, and the body more than clothing. Consider the ravens. They neither sow nor reap. They have neither storehouses nor barn, and yet God feeds them. Of how much more value are you than the birds? And can any of you, by worrying, add a single hour to your span of life? If then you are not able to do so small a thing as that, why do you worry about the rest? Consider the lilies and how they grow. They neither toil nor spin, and yet I tell you, even Solomon in all his glory was not clothed like one of these. But if God so clothes the grass of the field, which is alive today and tomorrow is thrown into the oven, how much more will he clothe you, O you of little faith? And do not keep striving for what you are to eat and what you are to drink, and do not keep worrying, for it is the nations of the world that strive after all these things. And your Father knows that you need them. Instead, strive for his kingdom, and all of these things will be given to you as well. Do not be afraid, little flock, for it is your Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom. Sell your possessions and give alms. Make purses for yourselves that do not wear out, an unfailing treasure in heaven, where no thief comes near and no moth destroys. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also." This man got a little more than he bargained for, didn't he? "Jesus, come tell my brother to split the inheritance with me and to do it in the right way." That's what's implied in the text, even though it doesn't say that. It's, the man just says, "Tell him to divide the inheritance with me." But what he really wants is for it to be divided down to the very last penny. Every last plant needs to be divided. Every last field needs to be divided. Even maybe their father's garments cut in such a way so that it's divided fairly. Now at the time, it was this system of the oldest son gets a double portion. So if there were 4 kids, they would divide it by 5. The oldest brother would get 2/5, and everybody else would get 1/5. If there was 2 sons, they would divide it by 3, and the oldest son would get 2/3, and the younger son would get 1/3. And so dividing things precisely was what they were all about. That's some context so that we know what this guy's talking about here. Maybe this is the younger brother, because it wouldn't be the older brother. He'd probably already have everything written in his name. He'd probably already have everything deeded out to him before his father even died. Tell my big brother to be fair. I don't know about the rest of you parents out there. Sometimes I hear these things. Sometimes I hear these things as a parent. Tell them to be fair. It's my turn. Come tell them to share with me. This man lacking a living father comes to Jesus and says, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me properly. And Jesus says, oh boy, you are worried about the wrong things. And not only does he say that, but he gives a lesson, moral lesson, tells a story, and makes him an object lesson. That wasn't very nice of Jesus. We like to think of Jesus being nice. I don't think he was so much nice as he was truthful. Sometimes truth hurts. Sometimes truth hurts. Now, I think Jesus would have said all of this with kindness and with goodness and with probably a little bit of a smile on his face. Especially some of this language that he uses in the teaching, in the direct section of teaching from 22 through 34, is very intimate language. It's very you and me. It's very take you by the arm, put you under my shoulder and say, listen, you're worried about the wrong things. You're worried about the wrong things. And it reminds me of when Jesus speaks to Mary and Martha, or speaks to Martha in that story of Jesus with Mary and Martha, where Mary's seated at his feet. And Martha says, Jesus, come tell my sister to help me in the kitchen because you've got a big crowd of hulking guys and there's only 2 of us here and I need her help if we're going to get supper out on time. Jesus says to her, Martha, Martha, you're worried and concerned about so many things. So many things. And most of them things that will not matter in the days to come. Those are my words, not Jesus. You can read that story on your own. So many things that we worry about won't matter. How many things do we worry about that will not matter in a week? I'm a seminary student. I worry a lot about my homework. Next week, am I going to worry about the homework from this week? Nope. Jesus says at some point in the Gospels, each day has enough worry of its own, enough trouble of its own. As a seminary student, each week has enough homework of its own. I've got to worry about this week's homework this week, next week's homework next week. If I were to try to worry about an entire semester's worth of homework in 1 week, I'd lose my mind. How much of what we're worried about today won't matter in a year? How much of what we're worried about today won't matter in 5 years, or 10 years, or 20? How much of what seems so vitally important to us today, that takes up so much mental space in our minds, takes up so much energy in our lives, how much of that is worry about things that matter in the long run? It seems so important and so immediate, and yet most of it will pass away. Most of it is stuff that we won't even remember in 5 years' time. Seems impossible to believe that, doesn't it? These things that worry us and keep us up at night, that in 5 years' time, we won't even remember what kept us awake. I don't remember what kept me awake 5 years ago, do you? Oh, I do remember what kept me up 5 years ago because he's now 6. And so, late night feedings. But most of what keeps us awake at night, we won't care about in 5 years. Let alone remember let alone set such a high priority on. Now, something like an inheritance does make a difference, right? It makes a difference in the quality of our lives. But even that, Jesus is saying, you are giving this way too much weight. Now, the time span that he talks about is a lifetime. So I'm saying, in 5 years it won't matter. At the end of your life, will it matter? That's the question Jesus is asking. At the end of your life, will it matter? And when Jesus talks about these things, he's not just coming up with this out of the blue. If we only read the New Testament, sometimes we think, wow, Jesus was a genius. And he was, okay? He was. But he's building on a tradition that already exists. If you want to know the tradition he's building on here, go back to the Old Testament and read the book of Ecclesiastes, which says, meaningless, meaningless, everything is meaningless, a chasing after the wind. And one of the big themes in Ecclesiastes is this one of wealth. It's written by a wealthy, powerful man, looking back at his life saying, it's meaningless for a man to build up wealth and to work really hard and build up land and houses and store things away, because the end of his life comes and somebody else gets it. So what's the point? What's the point? The author of Ecclesiastes says the point is to enjoy the life that you have while you have it and to fear God. That's the whole conclusion of that book. Go back and read it anyways. Don't just take my word for it. Jesus is picking up on that thread of wisdom from Ecclesiastes and saying, look, there was a man and he was rich and he had abundance and that was good. Okay, notice Jesus does not say the man's abundance was bad. He doesn't say that having a good crop year was bad. He doesn't say the man's wealth was bad. He says what he does at the end of this big crop year was meaningless. Because looking around, he said, my barns aren't big enough to hold everything that I have. What are his options? If his barns aren't big enough to hold everything that he has, what are his options? Well, he could sell it, right? He could sell the excess. He could give it away. He could have a big party and invite all his neighbors. He could go out and find those who are hungry and give them food. He could give it away to God at the temple, and they would distribute it to the poor on his behalf. There are lots of options, but the one that he fixates on is, I know, I will tear down the barns I already have and build bigger barns so that I can store this grain. When you demolish a building and build a bigger one, what do you have to do? You have to invest. How much did this man spend of his own resources and wealth just so that he could hang on to his new resources and wealth? Do you think it's possible he broke even? Do you think it's possible that he actually invested more time and money and energy in building those new big barns than what the grain going in them was worth? It's possible. Especially if he was anticipating many more years of this kind of surplus. He wasn't investing just for this 1 year of abundance. He was investing for the years and years of abundance to come. Jesus says, God spoke to this man and said, tonight, it's all going to be over for you. And then what? What about your investment? And then what? What about these bigger barns you built that you invested all this time and money and energy into building to store this grain? You're not going to eat the grain. You're not going to fill that building again. Your time is over. How much are your buildings worth now? He turns to his disciples and he says, listen, this is what I'm trying to tell you. Your life is more than what you possess. Your life is more than what you possess. Your life, the life that you live on this earth, is more invested in the connections you have with the people around you than it is with anything else. And even those are fleeting. Statistically, within about 2 generations, this is a grim statistic, so hold on to your seats. Within 2 generations, no one will know who you are. Within 2 generations, no one will know who you are. We know our parents. We know our grandparents. The memories we have of our great-grandparents are what? Fuzzy. And our children don't even know their names. Our connections to this life, even to the most meaningful part of this life, are tenuous. They're tenuous. They're fleeting. They pass away quickly. But this is what Jesus says about this fleeting life that we live. He says, consider the lilies of the field. They're here today and gone tomorrow. Our lives, as important as we feel like our lives are, as central as our lives are to the way we view the world, are like those lilies that are here today and gone tomorrow. Here today and gone tomorrow. He says these lilies, they neither toil nor spin. They don't work all day making sure they look beautiful. And yet, nothing is as beautiful as them. Even Solomon in all of his glory was not clothed like one of these. And if God clothes the grass of the field, which is so fleeting, with such glory, how much more does God care about you, O you of little faith? And he points at the birds and he says, look, how many of these birds are building bigger barns? None of them. And yet, God sees value in them. God feeds them in due season. He says, trust God. Strive for the kingdom goals, and these things will be given to you as well. And this is that intimate, super intimate phrasing. Do not be afraid, little flock. How much of our worry comes from fear? How much of our worry comes from fear? I don't usually worry about the things I'm joyful over. Oh, I'm just so worried that everything is wonderful. Oh, I'm just so worried that everything is going well. Oh, I'm just so worried that I have such joy. No. Worry springs from fear. Do not be afraid, little flock, for it is your Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom. Even though our lives are fleeting, even though in 2 generations no one will know our names, guess what? God does. God sees us. God sees you in this moment. And God places imminent value on your life, the life that God has breathed into you. God has crowned us with glory, has given us joy and grace and beauty in our lives. Enjoy it. Enjoy it. Enjoy the gifts that God has given and be generous. Sell what you have. Give your possessions away. Give alms. And in doing so, you connect yourself more fully, more deeply with the life that matters most. The life that we have, being those who are connected to God. Where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Do we invest? Are we investing in building bigger barns? Or are we investing in the life that matters? The life that we share together, the life that connects us with all the source of life for all. Are we investing in the kingdom? Now, this is not a stewardship Sunday. I'm not saying these things to you so that you will write bigger checks to put in the offering plate. I'm saying these things to you because, like Christ, my desire is for you to live a full and abundant life. Worry and fear just take away. Worry and fear don't add anything to our lives. So don't worry about what you will eat and what you will drink and what you will wear, because your Father has been so gracious, and it is his good pleasure to give you not only what you need, but to give you access to the kingdom of God as well.